welcome to the reoccurring event of the logic of impossibility, the fact that people won't accept positive changes in the area of sexuality.
You're here with your hosts, Mira.
Hello, I'm Hector.
I'm Adam.
And I'm Jordan Kessler.
And we're here to inform you on the wonderful world of same-sex sexuality and prejudice. Rachel Hope Cleves provides us with this beautiful article on the homosexual quality of a solid marriage. However, not all people associate beautiful marriage with homosexuality. Even modernized American historians seldom refer to homosexuality.
Page 1060 of this document talks specifically about the persecution of marriage and the plastic mold that defines a proper marriage. The plastic marriage is the idea that the bond of marriage defines the couple in the marriage, not only in love, but the social and monetary hierarchy. When one gets married, it is expected that each person in the marriage, regardless of their gender, is subject to higher responsibilities, not only to their significant other, but to society as well. You must fill in the plastic molds in order to fit into society. And unfortunately, in the case of homosexual marriages, even the most common mold isn't enough to fit in. It is hard for people outside of the homosexual world, whether they be allies or not, to understand the social judgment applied to these people. For the homophobes, it is an irrational mute point because it shouldn't exist in the first place. It does not fit the mold that marriage is supposed to be. What is marriage supposed to be anyways? I think it's supposed to be about love, so get checked. Anyways, however, when we look at the marriage in the sense of a plastic mold, it not only defines the couple in the mold, but the way we think and act towards the couple. For example, if it is a white man and a white woman, many people see that as the proper marriage. The idea that there has to be a mold for marriage physically and emotionally denies the fact that other love exists in the world and invalidates the love that people feel for each other. This can be more specifically delved into through the analysis of the indigenous and sexual relations.
The Spanish conquistador Alvaro Núñez Cabeza de Vaca, who was the first European to travel along the Gulf Coast, wrote that on his journey from 1528 to 1536, he observed the custom of one man being married to another. Cabeza de Vaca differentiated these marriages from non-marital sex between men. Within marriages between men, one spouse occupied a common indigenous gender role that settlers called the burdick. The male-bodied burdick dressed as a woman, performed woman's work, and assumed the receptive role in sexual relations. Cabeza de Vaca leveraged his description of marriages between men to establish his claim that America was a land so strange, requiring the imposition of European order. As Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito once said, same-sex marriage is newer than cell phones. His position comes from the false premise that there is no historical record for same-sex marriage. While the history of homosexuality is something that was not chronicled by the historians of the past, it is now a topic that historians today treat with the respect it deserves. Due to the malign nature of homosexuality in the past, the history of what the LGBTQ community had to endure is often written from the perspective of those who were doing the persecuting. This leaves historians the tough task of picking through the slurs and slanders to find glimpses of reality for the gay culture of the past.
So anytime a same-sex marriage narrative appeared in publication in the Anglo-American world, it was seen through the lens of the logic of impossibility. So writers worked to delegitimize same-sex union in several ways. So tales of women becoming married to a man only to discover that their husbands were in fact female were widely published and received a lot of attention. These stories would use exclamation points and sensationalist headlines like, "Her husband was a woman." These headlines would not only shock the reader, but reinforce the idea that same-sex union was unnatural. This was the treatment that same-sex unions received in publication in the 18th and 19th centuries. By the 20th century, publications started using quotation marks to distinguish the recognition of a opposite-sex marriage to same-sex unions. Titles like "Marriages Between Women" contained the quotations that symbolized that these unions were not true legal unions, but a falsity masquerading as something it could never be. So publications also used fiction to underlie their claims that female husbands were an impossibility. Claims like "a true story that finds no parallel in the pages of fiction" were used to cement this belief into the public zeitgeist. So this is interesting because here we have newspapers saying that same-sex unions are so bizarre they could only exist in the realm of fiction. a world of fantasy. But throughout the past 300 years, there are publications of same-sex unions in the Anglo-American world. It is not fiction, it is reality. If one is not looking through the lens of impossibility, one can see that same-sex unions were viewed as acceptable. The references of headlines such as "another female husband" shows that these cases were plentiful. You hear a lot today about representation. Representation matters. It does. If you can see a version of yourself in something, you do not feel so alone. It is a fact of life that there are intersex people, people who are the same sex, people who like the opposite sex. We could go on. So when fiction is used to promote gender norms, by showing a doomed same-sex union, it ends up having an unintended consequence for the writer by representing those marginalized by society. This is seen in Henry James's The Bostonians. The relationship between the two female characters is presented as ruinous, but it plants some seeds of feminist ideals.
Dissenting Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito rejected the claim that same-sex marriage rose to the standard of rights deeply rooted in this nation's tradition. He said that it is beyond dispute that the right to same-sex marriage is not deeply rooted in this nation's history and tradition. Cleves says that the logic of impossibility, even as it loses hold on the present, still seems to govern interpretations of the past. Hopefully, Cleves' words can illuminate the dark history that shrouds the past of the LGBTQ community and reveal that their community has and always will be a part of our nation.
As Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito once said, same-sex marriages, younger than cell phones. Same-sex marriages. Same-sex marriages. As Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito once said, same-sex marriages, younger than cell phones. Same-sex marriages.
Enough dilly-sallying. Let's get on with our program.